than the purchase of indulgences. 44, that because through the work of charity, charity is increased, Christian love is increased, and a man advances in goodness, whereas through indulgences there is no advance in goodness, but only an increase in freedom from penalty in purgatory. 45, Christians are to be taught that a man who sees a brother in need and passes him by, to give his money, to spend his money instead in the purchase of indulgences, wins for himself not the indulgence of the Pope, but the indignation of God, the anger of God. Christians must be taught that if the Pope knew the exactions, the abuses by some preachers of indulgences, he would never have St. Peter's Basilica, he would rather have St. Peter's Basilica reduced to ashes than built with the skin, flesh, and bones of his sheep. So he's assuming the Pope doesn't know what's going on. And of course, if he knew because indulgences were being faked, there were forgeries circulating all around. If you were smart and you knew how to read and write, you just would pretend that this indulgence had been issued by the Pope and then sell it, and of course you would keep the money, okay? But, so he says if the Pope knew the abuses that are going on, he'd rather not have the St. Peter's Cathedral built than have it built on this basis. So Luther did not mean to start a new branch of Christianity. He wanted to remain a Catholic priest as he was. But eventually, when asked to retract by the Pope and the Church, he refused, and he was eventually excommunicated in 1521. Okay? And Henry VIII had been very supportive of the Pope against this German reformer, to the point that he even wrote a book in defense of the Roman Catholic Church and the Roman Pope and the authority of the Pope against these reformers. By the way, the reformers came to be called Protestant because at a meeting, when the emperor, we're going to say more about the emperor now, when the emperor tried to come to a conciliation between the two parties, the reformers kept protesting the order given by the emperor to arrest Luther. So because they kept saying, I protest, we protest this, they came to be known as the protesters, or Protestants in the end. That's the only reason for them to be called Protestants, because of this little meeting, if you wish, nothing historically too important, but because they protested so much, the order to arrest Luther, he came to be known as Protestants. Okay? So back to Henry VIII. Henry VIII, as I said, had supported the Pope strongly before. Okay? Now he wanted to divorce Catherine. Now Catherine, as I said, was the sister of John the Mad, who married Philip the Handsome. Now John the Mad was known as John the Mad because he was so jealous, and he made these big shows, and he was probably a little mentally imbalanced, perhaps. I don't know. There are many books written on John the Mad where he was really a liberated woman, or he was whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But anyway, John the Mad and Philip the Handsome had a child, a boy, Charles. And guess what? After Isabella and Ferdinand died, and that's a long story, I'm not going to get into that either, and after, Philip the Handsome died, and Joan the Mad was considered incapable of ruling Castile because she was considered to be mad. Her son, Charles, became the actual king of Castile and Aragon, the whole of Spain. And not only that, of course, Castile and Aragon had other territories. He inherited all of these sections that belonged to Aragon, all of these lands in here. And he also, of course, he inherited everything that belonged on his father's side. And not only that, look at this, but it says the Holy Roman Empire. What was the Holy Roman Empire? Well, what we call Germany today was back then divided into these little principalities and kingdoms, and they named an emperor to rule all over them. And that emperor was called the Holy Roman Emperor, which was kind of a symbolic reminder of the Roman emperors of the past. Okay? It wasn't really the Roman Empire properly, but they called this emperor the Holy Roman Emperor. Okay? And guess what? Charles, the son of John and Philip Handsome, was made Holy Roman Emperor. And guess what? France felt in a state of danger because it was literally surrounded by Spanish power. I mean, Charles lived in Spain. He was the king of Spain, the son of Ferdinand and Isabella. I mean, the grandson of Ferdinand and Isabella. And he ruled all over this, around France. And not only that, the Americas were being conquered. So it was a huge empire. And the king of France had been trying to conspire with the Pope against the emperor, and the emperor was kind of upset about that. Okay? And certain things happened that showed the Pope that he shouldn't conspire against the emperor. Not only that, the Protestant Reformation was taking place in Germany and Switzerland, in this area which was under Spanish control, under the control of the emperor. So it was in this political situation that the Pope was being asked by the King of England to, first of all, to say that the previous Pope had been wrong in granting permission for the marriage after 20 years of being married, okay? And that therefore he was free to marry anyone he wanted, number one. And number two, I mean, he was asking something which politically would have placed the Pope in a very difficult situation. I mean, who was Catherine in relation to Charles, to the emperor? Who was Catherine in relation to Charles? Right, she was the emperor's aunt, because remember, she was the sister of John, and Charles was, so basically what Henry VIII was asking would have, if granted, would have humiliated the emperor, would have been a humiliation for the emperor, a huge humiliation for the emperor. The emperor wouldn't have liked that at all. Right? So the Pope was not in a position to really grant what Henry VIII wanted at all. Okay? And if you've seen this TV series called The Tudors, you have a very good movie reenactment of that particular period and that particular circumstances, okay? And how the breakup with Rome took place. So since the Pope would not grant Henry VIII what he wanted, Henry VIII started moving, putting pressure on Parliament to pass laws that would separate the church in England, not the Church of England, but the church in England, because he would claim it's the same church as the church in Rome, but we do not owe obedience to the Pope. So, and eventually by 1534, that process culminated in what is known as the Act of Supremacy, meaning the Church of England does not have to respond to the Pope. The last authority of the church in England is the monarch, the king. And with that, the breakup was complete. Now, the church remained very much the same Catholic Church, or as the Catholic Church, except with no obedience to the Pope. Okay? But it just began going its own way. Now, when Henry VIII died, now let me tell you this, which is kind of an interesting thing. I think it really deserves a great movie. This is stuff for a great movie. I mean, Catherine, Henry VIII decapitated some of his wives, and later a series of wives he had, put them in prison or decapitated them. But Catherine, the first wife, of course, I don't think he would have dared to decapitate Catherine, because if he does that, imagine the reaction of the emperor if his aunt had been decapitated. He would have pretty much declared war on England or something. So, but she was kept pretty much as a prisoner queen. You know, she was the Queen of England, maybe no longer recognized as such after Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn. But if you see the Tudors, this series is really, it's a very good reenactment of how it happened. But still, she received all the honors pretty much of a queen, but still a prisoner queen in a castle. While her sister Joan, after Philip died, she came to Spain, to Castile, and she was acclaimed as the queen. But she was put aside by first her father, Ferdinand, and then her son, Charles, and she, guess what? She ended up also as a prisoner queen in a castle. Treated as a queen with all the honors of a queen, but prisoner, unable to leave the castle, unable to give orders outside the castle. The two sisters, really an amazing situation. Two sisters, and the two of them ended up something unique in history, two prisoner queens, one in England and one in Spain. Of course, they were not recognized as actual queens after the events took place in England and in Castile, but pretty much they were displaced, so to say, and became, for all purposes, like prisoner queens. When Henry VIII died, it was his daughter, the daughter he had with Catherine, who became queen. Before that, little Prince Edward became king, but he died within a short time. So the next in line was Mary. And guess what? Mary was very much against everything his father had done. In fact, his father had tried to prevent her from becoming queen, and so that's why the crown passed to the little this young man he had with one of his other wives. But because he died, Mary became the queen. And she was very much against everything her father had done. She had been raised very close to her mother, Catherine. And so the first thing she did was to do everything in her hand to revert England back to the Catholic Church, burn as many of her father's followers as she could at the stake, and marry her cousin, Charles's son, Philip, the king of Spain, the new king of Spain, the new king to be in Spain. Philip went to England, and of course the idea was that when they married, they would have a child, and this child would inherit both England and Spain. And the subtle idea was that England would be under Spain's dominion. It's one more part of the empire in the end. But what happened was that Mary was already 35, she was sickly, and they couldn't procreate. And Mary died within 5 years. And then, who came to the throne after that? Well, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth was a Protestant-minded queen. And so in the end, Philip II tried to invade England. The story of the Armada that failed to invade England. But that's beyond the scope of this class. Okay, let me briefly summarize what we've seen. We've reviewed the history of the Christian Church, the two major splits, Catholic versus Orthodox, and then the Protestant Reformation. In the Catholic Orthodox split, there's not a big difference in the theologies, the beliefs, but when it comes to the Protestant Reformation, yes, there is. The value of works, very important. The predestination, the notion that you've been predestined to be saved or damned, that separates that belief from Catholicism. And that's going to play a major role in our study of Max Weber in our next session. And then finally, mediation as well as being denied in radical Protestantism. And then we've looked at the Church of England and the circumstances that led to the separation from Rome. So thank you very much, and I will see you in our next session.